we have a quorum right now. So I'd like to call the meeting to order at 4:32. And first, before we get into other items, just a quick announcement for Mr. Amy, and that is there'll be one opportunity tonight to speak. It'll be before number 3A. So I wanted to let you know that in case you want to combine your two speaking requests into one. Okay.
I'm sorry, Terry. My understanding is we are required to have public comment on non-agenda item on every agenda, and I don't see one on here. So we should add that either before or after closed session, right? Because we're required by law to have that on every agenda. Isn't that right?
So point of clarification, Mr. President, if I may, Trustee Clark. So the Brown Act requires public comment on a special agenda item to be discussed. It allows the board to take public comment on any other item within the jurisdiction of the district. So different agencies handle it different ways. I believe we have a tradition here of allowing public comment on any issue of agency business at special meetings as well. So it would be appropriate to add to the agenda, I think, as President Andrews suggested, a closed session, excuse me, a public comment section right before item number 3 on either the closed session item itself as listed on the agenda or on any item of business within the agency's jurisdiction at the board's pleasure. Sounds like Trustee Clark is suggesting the latter.
Yeah, just so that we're consistent.
Okay,
so we
that's
have
fine. That was my check before the meeting, and that was my understanding about it. So.
Yeah.
All right. So I'd like to call us to order and then have a roll call, please. Trustee Andrews is here. Yeah, you're next.
Betsy Cohen here. Katie Clark here.
And Jason Capel is excused absence today, and Glenn McMullins is expected shortly. So with that, I would like to recess into closed session after I hear from the first speaker for.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm loud. I'm Renee Amy, and first off, I'd like to point out thank you to library staff and the Nom Nom Club, the teenagers and preteens, who all dropped all kinds of things so that you people could do this today here. This space is normally occupied at this time by community activities, and kudos to library staff for giving up their break room so that you can do this. And perhaps not kudos to me for having gotten a copy of that settlement agreement that is the cause of this afternoon's discussions and endeavor in closed session, and more money being spent on attorneys to basically inform you folks about what you signed. I find it unbelievable that there is a need to have a closed session. And it's not just me. I mean, yeah, I got this on January 31st and read it and went, wow, that sounds really interesting. Look, they use one of my favorite laws. They specifically reference the California Public Records Act. And there's a cascade of actions that the library was past tense, required to engage in, that the library has failed to engage in. And the funny thing is, I'm not the only person to recognize that fact. It turns out that a former board member, the day after I made my request, also made a request under the California Public Records Act that triggered that same cascade of events. But the library has violated the settlement agreement. Now, I think I counted 4 different attorneys who were involved in reading the settlement agreement. And certainly all the members of this board were involved in reading and signing that, as well as that former board member who signed under protest. So there was plenty of time to read and consider and consult with staff attorneys and all the attorneys involved and find out what it all meant, especially because there's wordage in here in caps and bolded Please read carefully. This is right above the signature area. Apparently, no one bothered to. So now you have not only Mindy Katay, the former library director, who could sue. You have Ira Bershapsky, who might choose to sue. Mr. Bershapsky is known to always follow the reasonable path in things, I think we've all seen. And of course, you have me, who may sue as well. So this afternoon, as you go into closed session, please think about 3 potential lawsuits, not just the one that's on your agenda. Thank you.
All right, now I'd like to recess into our closed session.
Sherry, just a note, we do have a program, a library program that will leave the room by 6:30, so should the closed session go longer than that, we'll need to reconvene up in the director's office to adjourn the meeting.
Okay, good. I talked to folks about that, and I don't anticipate going that long, but thanks for the notice.
Mr. President, if it turns out for some reason, and I'm not preordaining this or wishing it in any sense, if you do go past 6:30, just be advised that you should post on the door the location where we will be recording our open session, so that anybody who cares to come listen or hear knows where we're going to be.
Okay, thanks.
And before we go into closed session, the law requires to make a verbal announcement of the closed session item the board will be considering, and it's listed on the agenda as conference with legal counsel regarding pending litigation under Government Code Section 56.9, subsection D2. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we will recess at 4:39 in the closed session. All right, we are back from recess, and we are reconvening here at 5:34 p.m. And we have discussed our closed session item, and we do have a report on that item. I'm going to turn this over to Ruben to give us that.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I'd like to report that pursuant to a motion by Trustee Clark, seconded by Trustee Khan, the unanimous vote of 4-0, the board voted to release unredacted versions of both investigative reports at issue in the Katay matter to Ms. Katay's attorneys as required under the settlement agreement for the limited purpose of allowing her and her attorneys to determine whether they will seek to enjoin the district from producing those reports to other Public Records Act requesters. And so my office will communicate that decision to Mr. Gronemeyer after close of business, so tomorrow morning. And then that will essentially start a series of events wherein Mr. Gronemeyer will receive the reports, again, unredacted. They will have an opportunity to determine whether they will seek a court to enjoin, that is to stop the district from producing those reports to other requesters. That process could take some number of days, up to a couple of weeks, to decide whether he's going to file that action. And if he does, then that's a whole separate series of deadlines, which I'm happy to report to you as soon as I know more.
Okay, thank you. So before we adjourn, Renee, you do have an opportunity for another public comment.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, and thank you for taking that action and avoiding the ugliness, the further ugliness that would have occurred had you not. I want to point out one thing. This is a Public Records Act action, and as I pointed out to staff, Public Records Act is one of those things where you actually have to pay attention to the law, and you need to do best practices. And I have offered repeatedly now to assist with that as someone who has an extensive history of utilizing and understanding the Public Records Act and its timelines and issues. And so this is going to sound a little bit weird for me to say this, but I'm not the only person who makes Public Records Act requests. Neither is Dale Gronemeyer. Neither is Mark Mariscal. I mentioned someone else, a prior board member, Ira Bershapsky. Recently, he made a total of 7 Public Records Act requests for a broad and actually physically difficult to read set of documents and records. And it's going to sound weird, but in a way, I have to thank the legal counsel for the library district for working with Mr. Bershatsky to try and understand what it was he was after. Specifically, one request had to do with, because everybody loves this topic, pornography. He wanted all the pornography that the former library district director had downloaded. So he wanted all the files on her computer. It turns out that was in excess of 100,000 files. So attorneys for the library worked with Mr. Bershatsky, as the law provides, to try and narrow the scope of his request, because the attorneys recognized it would take 6 months to 1 year of effort to fulfill his request. They narrowed it down with his assistance to a variety of file types and came up with 1,770 files that would meet his specific curious criteria. Then, after library attorneys reviewed 1,770 files for pornography to fulfill Mr. Bershatsky's desires, they discovered that there was no pornography. When sex came up, it had to do with equal opportunity employment issues. Let's see, what was the other one? Oh, heck, I don't know. It's all just, Triple X, that was it. It's a great example. Triple X came up on some of the web browsing, and it was because it was just a default system in the numbering of a file that had nothing whatsoever to do with pornography. So to wrap up, every once in a while, it's nice to see an agency work with members of the public to try and limit the exposure. And again, I'm happy to work with AO.
Okay, thank you, Renee. Right, with that, we call for a motion to adjourn. It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you.